after 14 years at Northbridge Event Solutions. I sat in the office I had quietly turned into a command center. Cables routed perfectly behind desks, labeled hard cases stacked in the corner, a control console humming softly under my fingertips. Most people saw a workspace. I saw 14 years of late nights, emergency fixes, and systems I built because no one else could or would. "Sadie," my boss Mark Ellison said, folding his hands like he was about to apologize without actually meaning it. "Due to restructuring, we're eliminating your position." I didn't react. I'd learned long ago that silence unsettles people more than anger. "We're bringing in a junior coordinator," he continued. "Lower cost, fresh energy. She'll absorb your responsibilities over time." Over time. The phrase landed like an insult dressed as strategy. "I understand," I said calmly. Mark exhaled, relieved. "HR will send paperwork. You'll need to clear out by Friday, and take everything that belongs to you." He said it casually, like he was being generous. I smiled, just slightly. "Of course," I replied. "I'll take everything that's mine." What Mark never bothered to learn was how much of Northbridge's operation had quietly shifted onto my shoulders. I was hired as a media coordinator. Then I became the AV lead when the vendor quit mid-contract. Then the live stream architect when clients demanded multi-city broadcasts. When equipment went missing or budgets were frozen, I filled the gaps using my own money, my own gear, my own backups, camera rigs, switchers, wireless mic systems, redundant servers, every piece labeled, every receipt archived. They used to joke about it, paranoid much. Sadie No prepared. Thursday morning, before anyone else arrived, I unlocked the storage room with my own key and started packing. Cases rolled smoothly across the floor. Cables coiled neatly. The control console powered down for the first time in years. When Mark walked in and saw the empty racks, his face drained of color. You can't take that," he said. I looked at him, calm as ever. "You told me to take everything that was mine. By noon, half the infrastructure was gone. By Friday, Northbridge no longer had the systems or the person keeping it alive. And Monday was coming." Listening up to this point, I'm not sure how you're feeling: relieved, frustrated, or quietly still because it all feels too familiar. If your mood feels heavy, try writing down one thing you're proud of yourself for today, even something small, and leave it on your desk. It can steady your thoughts more than you expect. Where are you listening from right now? If Sadie's story resonates with you, stay with us and consider subscribing, because from here on, what happens next slips completely out of their control. The first thing I noticed after I left Northbridge Event Solutions wasn't relief. It was the quiet. No emails lighting up my phone. No frantic messages asking where a cable was stored or why a feed was lagging. Just a long, unfamiliar stretch of silence that made the last 14 years feel unreal. By Saturday morning, my garage looked like a professional staging area. Hard cases stacked in neat rows. Lighting rigs leaned carefully against the wall. Every item cleaned, labeled, ready. For the first time, none of it belonged to someone else's deadline. My neighbor, Caleb, paused at the end of the driveway while walking his dog. "New business?" he asked, nodding toward the gear. "Old work," I said, finally at home. He didn't press. People rarely do when they sense a line they shouldn't cross. I spent the morning reviewing Northbridge's public event calendar. I didn't need insider access. Everything was right there. Their flagship project, the Tri-State Leadership Forum, was scheduled for Monday morning. 3 cities, live panels, remote keynote, sponsors watching closely. Every year, I had built that event from the ground up. Every cable path, every redundancy, every contingency for things that could, and always did, go wrong. They didn't just fire an employee. They removed the only person who knew where the weak points were. Sunday afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Elaine, one of the senior coordinators who had survived more layoffs than anyone else. "Just wanted to give you a heads up," Things are tense. I waited. They can't locate half the AV inventory. Mark's saying it must be misplaced. They had the new hire try to run a test stream. It failed twice. He asked if anyone still had your setup notes. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Those notes lived on my personal drive. Mark had never asked for access. He'd never thought it mattered. I don't work there anymore, I typed back. She didn't reply. That evening, I walked back into the garage and powered up one of the switchers, just to confirm what I already knew. Everything worked, smooth, reliable, quiet. Northbridge had spent years mistaking stability for simplicity. Because things didn't break, they assumed nothing complicated was holding them together. They were wrong. At 8:30 Monday morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another call. Then a voicemail notification. I listened to it once. Mark's voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Faster. Sadie, this is Mark. There's been some confusion about the equipment. We may need to clarify ownership urgently. Please call me back. I deleted the voicemail. I wasn't angry. I wasn't celebrating. I was finally still. And somewhere across 3 cities, a live broadcast was about to discover what happens when silence replaces experience. My phone started vibrating across the kitchen counter. I didn't pick it up. I stood by the window instead, watching the light shift slowly across the floor, thinking about how many mornings I'd spent hunched over control panels, headset on, coffee untouched, solving problems before anyone else even knew they existed. The calls kept coming. I didn't need to answer to understand what was happening. Technical failures follow a pattern. First, the sound distorts. Then the video freezes. Then someone on stage leans toward the microphone and asks, a little too loudly, "Can anyone hear me?" That moment never stays private, out of habit. I opened my laptop not to help, just to confirm. The public feed for the Tri-State Leadership Forum was already filling with complaints. Audio keeps cutting out. Is the stream broken for anyone else? This is supposed to be a professional event. I closed the browser. Northbridge had gone live without the systems I built, without the redundancies I insisted on, without the person who knew where the fragile points were hidden. A voicemail notification appeared. I listened. It was Elaine, her voice low and tight, like she was calling from a hallway she didn't want to be seen in. They're scrambling. Sadie. The new hire doesn't know the setup. Mark's yelling at vendors who were never part of this. Someone tried to route the stream through a personal tablet. It's chaos. I rested my phone face down on the counter. That exact scenario was why I'd built safeguards, why I labeled cables, why I kept backups no one wanted to pay for. Northbridge had called it overkill. I'd called it experience. An email followed soon after. Subject: quick question. It was from Jared Holt, their marketing director. Hey Sadie, Mark asked if you might still have any of the live stream documentation. Even a short call could help stabilize things. A short call, 14 years. Reduced to a favor. I didn't reply. Public statements went out next, carefully worded. Vague. Blaming temporary technical difficulties. The comments underneath told a different story. Sponsors don't like uncertainty. Attendees don't forgive disorganization. And leadership forums, of all things, aren't supposed to look improvised. Then my phone rang again. This time, it was Mark. I answered not out of obligation, but because silence had already done enough. Sadie, he said quickly, we just need some guidance. Nothing major. You know the system better than anyone. I leaned against the counter. Calm. You told me to take everything that was mine. I said. I did. A pause. We didn't realize how much that included. I know, I replied. The line stayed open, filled with nothing but the sound of a company realizing that stability isn't luck, it's built. And once it's gone, no amount of urgency can bring it back for free. Most won't notice what just went wrong for them, but you might. I didn't hear from Mark again that afternoon. That, more than anything, told me how bad things really were. When people still believe they're in control, they argue, they minimize, they stall. Silence only comes after they realize they're out of options. By evening, my inbox looked different. No subject lines like quick question anymore. No casual tone, just urgency, stripped of politeness. The first message came from Northbridge's operations director, a woman who had never once spoken to me directly in 14 years. Sadie, we're experiencing significant technical disruption. We understand you're no longer with the company, but we'd like to discuss a paid consultation if you're open to it. Paid. The word arrived late, but it arrived. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was deciding whether to help, but because I was deciding how. I'd spent years solving crises for free simply because I was already there. Already logged in. Already responsible. That version of me didn't exist anymore. I walked back into the garage and sat on a folded road case, looking at the equipment stacked neatly around me. Everything was intact, clean, ready. Northbridge had mistaken my presence for permanence. They thought the systems would keep running because they always had. They didn't understand that I was the system. Another email arrived. This one from Mark himself. Sadie, I'll be direct. This situation is escalating. Sponsors are asking questions. We need your expertise. Name your rate. Name your rate. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then I opened a blank document. I didn't write an explanation. I didn't write an apology. I wrote terms. Consulting only. Remote access only. Minimum engagement window. Emergency rate. 4 times my old hourly pay. I attached the document to a short reply. I'm available as an independent consultant. These are my terms. If accepted, I can assess the situation. No emotion, no negotiation. I sent it and closed my laptop. Less than an hour later, a notification popped up. Accepted. No counteroffer. No hesitation. That told me everything. I logged into the temporary access portal they'd scrambled to create and immediately saw the damage. Improvised routing, missing failovers, a patchwork of last-minute decisions stacked on top of each other like cards. I didn't comment on the chaos. I didn't criticize. I fixed what I was contracted to fix. Quietly, efficiently, within minutes. The feed stabilized, audio leveled, video smoothed. The kind of correction that looks effortless when you know what you're doing and impossible when you don't. A message appeared from Mark. It's holding. Thank you. I didn't reply. My invoice went out before the event ended. It was paid the same evening. No acknowledgement of the years before. No apology. Just a transaction. And strangely, that was enough. Because for the first time, my value wasn't assumed. It was agreed to in writing. And somewhere inside Northbridge, the realization was settling in they hadn't just lost an employee. They'd trained their replacement to negotiate from the outside. The event ended without further collapse. From the outside, it probably looked like a close call, an unfortunate hiccup corrected just in time. Northbridge would frame it that way. They always did. But people who work around systems know the difference between a fluke and a failure barely contained. By the next morning, my inbox told a different story. The first message wasn't from Northbridge. It was from Harrison Cole, a regional conference organizer I'd worked with years earlier. I heard you stepped in to stabilize the Tri-State Forum. Are you freelancing now? I read it twice. Then another arrived, then another. Different names, different organizations. Same question. They'd noticed something subtle, something most executives miss. The stream quality hadn't just returned. It had changed. Cleaner transitions, balanced audio, a calm that hadn't been there before. People assume disasters end loudly. In reality, consequences spread quietly. I didn't rush to respond. I spent the morning drafting something I'd never had time to write, before a clear outline of what I actually did. Not a resume, not a job history, a service, assessment, system design, live event stabilization, preventive architecture. The work I'd been doing invisibly for 14 years now named, structured, and priced. That afternoon, one of the sponsors from the forum reached out directly. We noticed the improvement mid-event. If you're independent, we'd like to talk. Northbridge wasn't mentioned once. That mattered. I agreed to a short call, not an emergency, not a rescue, a conversation. They didn't ask where I worked before. They asked how I thought, how I planned, what I would change if the system were built properly from the start. When the call ended, they asked for a proposal, not a favor, not a last-minute fix. A proposal. Meanwhile, Northbridge stayed quiet. No follow-ups, no gratitude, just a calendar invite for future availability that I declined without comment. They'd gotten what they paid for, nothing more. By the end of the week, I'd had 3 serious inquiries, 1 signed, 1 pending, 1 waiting on internal approval. None of them wanted an employee. They wanted ownership-level thinking. That realization settled slowly but firmly. I hadn't been indispensable because I worked harder. I'd been indispensable because I cared more than the system allowed, and that kind of effort only survives when it belongs to the person giving it. On Friday evening, I walked back into the garage and looked around at the equipment again. This time, it didn't feel like storage. It felt like inventory. Tools waiting for purpose, not someone else's deadline. Northbridge would recover, or it wouldn't. But either way, the work I did there was no longer tied to their name. For the first time in my career, I wasn't filling a gap, I was defining the ground. If you're listening closely, you already know what's coming next, don't you? The call came at the end of the following week. I recognized the number before I answered. It wasn't Mark, it was Cynthia Rowe, Northbridge's chief financial officer. I'd met her exactly once at a company dinner, where she'd nodded politely and spent the rest of the evening discussing projections with people who'd never touched the systems those numbers depended on. "Sadie," she said evenly, "thank you for taking the call." I waited. "We've reviewed the recent events," she continued, "the client feedback, the operational strain. It's become clear that your role here was broader than we understood. Broader. A careful word. Chosen to avoid responsibility. We'd like to discuss bringing you back," she said. "Not in your previous position, a new one. Strategic oversight, authority to design systems the way you see fit." I leaned back in my chair. "And reporting to whom?" I asked. "To me," she replied quickly, directly. The silence stretched. She was offering what I'd asked for years ago: clarity, authority, recognition, only now. It came with urgency instead of respect. "I've moved on," I said calmly. She didn't argue. She pivoted. "We're prepared to be flexible. Compensation, resources, title, all the things that become available once the cost of losing someone is fully understood." "I'm not looking for a title," I said. "I'm building something." There was a pause on her end, a recalculation, then perhaps a partnership, she offered. An external retainer, priority access. That one I considered not because I needed Northbridge, but because it revealed the truth. They didn't want me back. They wanted control again. "I already sent my terms," I said. "They haven't changed." She acknowledged that, professionally, coolly, when the call ended. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. Later that day, I received confirmation on a second independent contract. Then a third inquiry landed before dinner. Northbridge wasn't collapsing dramatically. No headlines, no chaos, just erosion, small delays, lost confidence, clients asking sharper questions, the kind of unraveling that never makes noise until it's too late to reverse. I closed my laptop and stepped outside as the sun dropped behind the houses across the street. For years, I'd confused being needed with being valued. Northbridge had needed me. Now, others valued me. That difference changed everything. I didn't owe Northbridge resentment or loyalty. I owed myself continuity. And as the systems I'd built for others began forming the backbone of something new, I realized the truth they would never admit out loud, letting me go, didn't expose their weakness. It exposed their misunderstanding of where their strength had come from in the first place. There was something in the back that no one expected. The first client left without drama. No angry emails, no public statements. Just a calendar invite quietly canceled, and a follow-up that never came. I only knew because Elaine texted me late one evening. The healthcare group pulled their contract, said they're reassessing vendors. I didn't reply. That phrase, reassessing vendors, was corporate shorthand for loss of confidence. Once it appeared, it rarely reversed. A week later, another message. 2 more events postponed. Indefinitely. Northbridge wasn't imploding. It was thinning out. The way a structure weakens when load-bearing beams are removed and no one replaces them properly. From the outside, things still looked functional. Their website stayed polished. Their social feeds kept posting. But behind the scenes, the pressure had shifted. The systems I'd built had never been flashy. They were invisible by design, which meant when they disappeared, leadership didn't know what to point to or who to blame. Meanwhile, my calendar filled in a different way. One of the sponsors from the Tri-State Forum signed a 6-month consulting agreement. Another organization booked me to redesign their entire event infrastructure from scratch. No legacy mess, no shortcuts. They didn't ask for miracles. They asked for clarity. That was new. Northbridge reached out once more, not formally, not through leadership. A former project manager emailed me privately. "They're struggling," she wrote. "They still don't know how much you did. Mark keeps saying the problems are temporary. Temporary problems don't compound. Structural ones do." I watched the pattern repeat without intervening. Equipment rentals replacing owned gear. Vendors cycling in and out. Each decision costing more. Delivering less. The kind of inefficiency that never shows up immediately, but bleeds a company dry over time. Then came the message I didn't expect. It was from one of Northbridge's longest-standing clients. We'd worked together for nearly a decade. "We were told you're no longer with them," she wrote. "Is that true?" I answered honestly. "Yes." Her reply came quickly. "That explains a lot." 2 weeks later, she signed with me directly. Northbridge didn't lose her account because I took it. They lost it because continuity matters more than branding, and people notice when competence leaves. By then, I'd stopped checking their updates, not out of bitterness, but because my attention had shifted. I was building something stable, intentional, designed to function without burning the person holding it together, Northbridge. Meanwhile, kept patching holes without understanding the system beneath them. They hadn't just underestimated my role. They'd mistaken resilience for permanence. And from a distance, I watched the consequences unfold not with satisfaction, but with the calm clarity that comes when you finally see your absence doing the talking for you. The message arrived without warning. No small talk, no preamble, just a subject line that felt heavier than it should have. Request for discussion. It was from Northbridge's parent company. I read it once. Then again. They wanted to talk about recent operational challenges, leadership transitions, and strategic realignment. Words that usually appear after decisions have already been made and someone is being quietly escorted out. The meeting was virtual. I accepted, more out of curiosity than interest. 2 faces appeared on the screen. One I recognized. One I didn't. Mark wasn't there. That told me everything before anyone spoke. The woman introduced herself first. Calm, direct. She didn't waste time pretending this was casual. "We've been reviewing Northbridge's performance over the past quarter," she said. "It's become clear that critical knowledge left the company without a transition plan." She didn't say my name yet. The man beside her cleared his throat. "We'd like to understand what it would take for you to return," he said. "Return. Not consult. Not advise. Return." I listened without interrupting as they outlined a new structure. New leadership. a division built around systems instead of personalities. Authority written into the role, not implied. They had finally done the math. When they finished, the woman looked at me. "We recognize the way you were let go was mishandled," she said carefully. "We'd like the opportunity to correct that." I nodded once. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," I said, "but I'm not interested in coming back." Neither of them reacted immediately. That hesitation told me they'd expected negotiation. "We're prepared to be flexible," the man said. "Compensation, equity, autonomy. All the things that arrive once loss becomes measurable." "I already have autonomy," I replied. "I didn't before." Silence followed. Then the woman asked the only honest question anyone had asked me through this entire process. What changed? I didn't answer right away. "What changed?" I said finally, "is that I stopped confusing access with respect. I stopped filling gaps that no one wanted to acknowledge existed." I closed my notebook. "Northbridge doesn't need me back." I continued. "It needs to understand why it didn't notice when everything depended on one person. They thanked me for my time, professionally, politely. When the call ended, I didn't feel relief or vindication. I felt clarity. That evening, I reviewed contracts instead of emails from people asking for help they should have planned for. I mapped timelines instead of fixing emergencies. The work was quieter, cleaner. Northbridge would survive or it wouldn't. Either way, my future was no longer tied to their ability to recognize value only after it left the room. The confirmation didn't come through gossip. It came through numbers. I saw it in small, ordinary ways first. Event announcements quietly removed from calendars. Partnerships no longer mentioned in press releases. Familiar names disappearing from Northbridge's client list and reappearing elsewhere. One afternoon, an industry newsletter landed in my inbox. Northbridge Event Solutions announces internal restructuring following a challenging quarter. Challenging was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Elaine messaged me later that evening. "Mark's gone. Officially stepped down." I read it once and set the phone down. No reaction, no satisfaction, just confirmation. Leadership changes don't fix structural problems. They only expose them. By the time executives start rotating, the damage has already settled into the foundation. Northbridge hadn't failed because they lost me. They failed because they never understood what losing me meant. Around the same time, my own work stabilized into something steady. Predictable, in a good way. I wasn't juggling emergencies anymore. I was planning quarters ahead, designing systems that didn't depend on heroics or invisible labor. Clients didn't call me in a panic. They scheduled. They asked questions early. They listened when I explained why something needed to be built a certain way. They didn't argue about redundancy. They'd learned, often the hard way, what fragility costs. One morning, I received a forwarded memo from Elaine. No commentary, just a screenshot. Northbridge was downsizing again. This time, it wasn't framed as restructuring. It was framed as necessity. Vendors had pulled favorable terms. Long-standing clients had moved on. The company would continue operating, but smaller, quieter, more cautious. The version that once dominated regional events was gone. I didn't respond to Elaine, not because I didn't care, but because there was nothing left to say. That chapter had closed itself. That evening, I stayed late in my office, not because something had broken, but because I wanted to refine a framework I'd been building, a template for onboarding new teams, clear roles, clear ownership, clear documentation, the kind of structure I'd begged for years ago. I realized then that Northbridge had never been malicious, just careless. They'd relied on stability without investing in it. They'd mistaken loyalty for elasticity, and when elasticity snapped, they called it unexpected. I shut down my computer and turned off the lights. The work would be there tomorrow. Clean. Waiting. Built to last without consuming the person maintaining it. Northbridge would become a cautionary example quietly referenced, never publicly dissected, and I would move forward without carrying the weight of a system that only worked because someone refused to let it fail. People still ask if I regret how things ended with Northbridge. The honest answer is no. I didn't leave angry. I didn't leave victorious. I left clear. Clear about what my work was worth. Clear about what happens when systems depend on silence and sacrifice instead of structure. Clear about the difference between being relied on and being respected. When Mark told me to take everything that was mine, he thought he was talking about equipment, hardware, files, assets he could list on a spreadsheet. He didn't understand that the most valuable things had never been visible. The judgment to prevent problems before they formed. The discipline to document what no one else wanted to learn. The restraint to build redundancies people mocked until they needed them. Those things were always mine. I didn't take them out of spite. I took them because they were never owned by the company to begin with. Today, my workdays look different, quieter, deliberate. I choose clients who understand that stability is built, not improvised. I design systems that don't require someone to burn out just to keep them running. No one tells me to just make it work. We plan, we prepare, we respect limits. Northbridge still exists. In some form, smaller, careful, less certain of itself. I don't follow their updates anymore. They're no longer relevant to my decisions. That's the real ending, not collapse. Not revenge. Relevance shifting. I learned that organizations don't fail because people leave. They fail because they don't notice what people carry until it's gone. And by then, no amount of urgency can buy back what was given freely for too long. If there's a lesson here, it isn't dramatic, it's practical. Put your name on your work. Build systems that don't depend on your exhaustion. And when someone tells you to take everything that's yours, make sure you know exactly what that includes. Because sometimes, walking away isn't the end of a career. It's the first moment it finally belongs to you. I remember standing alone in my garage, surrounded by things I built, fixed, protected for years, and feeling something shift inside me. Not anger, clarity. I learned that loyalty without boundaries slowly erases you, and that real respect shows up before the crisis, not after. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to anyone who's ever kept things running in silence. How did this make you feel relieved, seen, or maybe a little uncomfortable? I'd love to hear your story too. Where are you listening from right now if this resonated with you? Leave a comment, give the video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. There are more stories ahead that might feel closer to home than you expect.